Beneath the waves lies a silence deeper than the night sky, a silence broken only by currents that move like invisible hands over ruins long forgotten. Imagine for a moment entire cities swallowed whole, not by time, not by conquest, but by the ocean itself. For centuries, whispers have drifted through myths and ancient texts, suggesting that beneath the ocean floor rests evidence of civilizations more advanced, more mysterious, and more forbidden than history dares to record. The question is not if they existed, it is why we are told they never did. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on bell icon so you never miss mysteries told like this. The first of these, Whispers, begins far from the hustle of modern cities, in waters where the tides conceal more than they reveal. The Bay of Cambay, off the western coast of India, is no ordinary stretch of water. Here, in the year 2001, sonar scans uncovered geometric shapes that could not be mistaken for natural formations. Rectangles, straight lines, and grid-like patterns emerged from the shadows of the seabed. Divers who descended into these depths found themselves brushing against stone blocks, pillars, and what appeared to be carved artifacts. At first, the discovery set the academic world ablaze. Was this proof of a lost city, predating the Indus Valley civilization by thousands of years? But just as quickly, the excitement dimmed. Institutions that had once proclaimed the finding fell eerily silent. Reports were locked away, and claims were dismissed as misinterpretations. Yet, the fragments pulled from the seabed told a different story. Among them lay pottery shards carbon dated to nearly 9,500 years ago, older than any known civilization in the region. If authentic, it would rewrite not only India's history, but humanity's timeline itself. Why then did the world look away? Why was the Bay of Cambay buried under layers of academic skepticism, despite physical evidence lying beneath the waves? Perhaps it is because acknowledging such a city means acknowledging that history as we know it is incomplete, that the neat order of civilization's rise is nothing more than a carefully maintained illusion. Consider this. Ancient texts from India speak of cities swallowed by the sea, places where gods walked among men and where knowledge flowed like rivers of light. The Mahabharata describes cities gleaming like gold before waves consumed them. For centuries, these accounts were labeled as myth, poetry, or allegory. But what if they were chronicles of memory, eyewitness records of cataclysms we refuse to accept? The discovery in the Bay of Cambay hints at a civilization older than Mesopotamia, older than Egypt, older even than the fertile crescents we call the cradle of mankind. If true, this submerged city pushes humanity's organized urban life back by millennia, suggesting that advanced cultures flourished long before we are willing to admit. Could these ruins be the faint echoes of an antediluvian world, one erased not by mere erosion of time, but by floods of unimaginable scale? Yet we must pause. The ocean is a keeper of secrets, but it is also a master of deception. Some skeptics argue the structures are natural formations shaped by geology rather than human hands. Others claim the artifacts are contaminated, their dates unreliable. But if these were the words of unbiased science, why the silence? Why the sudden withdrawal of research grants? The reluctance to probe further? The dismissal of divers' testimonies? It feels less like science and more like suppression. Suppose for a moment that Cambay is real, that beneath those waves lies not a fluke of geology, but the foundations of a forgotten city. Then the implications ripple outward. Did similar cities vanish under other oceans? Did floods, rising seas, or sudden cataclysms wipe out civilizations in ways we scarcely comprehend? And if so, are the ruins we find merely fragments of a vast and global story that mainstream history refuses to stitch together? The seabed does not yield its truths easily. Imagine swimming in those murky waters, where every flicker of light from your torch strikes a surface too flat, too carved, too precise to be natural. Imagine pulling from the silt a tool, a bead, a fragment of pottery, and realizing that you hold in your hands the remains of a world erased. What kind of people lived here? What knowledge did they possess? What calamity consumed them? Leaving only ruins beneath the sea. One diver, who spoke under the cover of anonymity, described the moment he brushed his hand across what felt like the steps of a staircase. Another described walls aligning at perfect right angles. Yet these accounts never found their way into official reports. Instead, what remains is a void, a silence deeper than the ocean itself, a silence that seems less like ignorance and more like intention. And so, the Bay of Cambay stands not only as a submerged site but as a symbol of what is hidden, of what is ignored, and of what may be deliberately withheld. If one lost city lies beneath those waters, how many more remain unseen, their stones slowly eroding, their stories dissolving into salt and tide? The oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface, yet humanity has explored less than 5% of them. Beneath the vast blue deserts, ridges and trenches, entire worlds may lie untouched, waiting for rediscovery. But Cambay teaches us something crucial. Finding is not the same as accepting. To accept is to confront, to rewrite, to undo the carefully woven narrative of progress. And therein lies the true mystery, not just what is beneath the ocean, but why we are told it cannot be there. For Cambay is not alone. Across the world, in waters both shallow and deep, ruins emerge like broken teeth from the seabed. Some resemble temples, others pyramids, still others long-forgotten streets. Each whisper of a civilization drowned. Each raises questions too dangerous for conventional history. What connects them? What catastrophe links their stories? And why, after all these centuries, do they still reach for us through the waves? The answer may lie not in the evidence, but in the fear of what the evidence reveals. For if Cambay is acknowledged, then myth becomes history, and history becomes myth. The line between the two dissolves, and with it, our fragile confidence in the story we call human civilization. But Cambay is only the first stone in this hidden mosaic. To trace the next, we must travel across the world, where waters conceal not only ruins, but secrets long denied. The ocean, it seems, is speaking. The question is, are we ready to listen? The sea has always been both cradle and coffin, sheltering life while swallowing memory. To those who dare to peer beneath its surface, it offers fleeting glimpses of structures so immense, so deliberate, that they unsettle the very ground of our accepted past. If Cambay whispers of forgotten civilizations, the waters near Japan scream of them, though muffled by waves and time. This is where the island of Yonaguni rests, battered by Pacific currents, concealing beneath its turquoise shallows something that should not exist. A stepped pyramid carved from stone, submerged for thousands of years. Divers first stumbled upon the Yonaguni Monument in 1986. What they saw has since been burned into the annals of forbidden history, terraces that descend like an ancient amphitheatre, platforms squared at impossible angles, corridors that stretch as though designed for processions. The largest structure, nearly 500 feet long, looms like a temple torn from the surface and hurled beneath the sea. One diver likened it to Machu Picchu, only drowned. Another, more cautious, described it as Atlantis made flesh. Mainstream scientists, however, have long argued that Yonaguni is nothing but natural erosion. Sandstone, they say, fractures along neat horizontal and vertical planes, forming shapes that mimic human construction. But those who have dived among its walls tell another story. They speak of sharp staircases too uniform to be mere geology, of platforms aligning with astronomical precision, of carvings etched faintly into the stone. And then there is the most chilling of all, the appearance of what some call the face, a massive human-like visage, sculpted or eroded, staring outward into the endless sea. What if this monument is no accident of stone? If crafted by human hands, Yonaguni would date back to the last ice age, more than 10,000 years ago, when sea levels were far lower and the land around Japan extended outward. That timeline does not just challenge history, it shatters it. For 10,000 years ago, humans were said to be hunter-gatherers, scattered tribes surviving on the edge of survival. They were not supposed to build temples, let alone monuments that echo the precision of modern architecture. This is why Yonaguni is dismissed, not because the evidence is lacking, but because accepting it means admitting that human civilization may stretch far beyond what we teach. Imagine a timeline where cultures rose, thrived, and fell long before the Sumerians etched cuneiform, long before the Egyptians raised their pyramids, long before history began. If Yonaguni is a city, then humanity has forgotten entire chapters of its own existence. But the monument does more than question. It hints. It hints at knowledge shared across oceans. Step pyramids appear in Mexico, in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, in forgotten corners of the globe. Why then would one not also appear in Japan, carved when the world's seas were still icebound? Is it coincidence, or is it evidence of a once-connected world, a civilization scattered by floods and remembered only in myths? Here we stumble upon a paradox. Myths across cultures tell of great floods, cataclysms that drowned lands and swept away cities. The Bible speaks of Noah's deluge. The Sumerians speak of Utnapishtim. Indian texts recall the flood of Manu, and Japan itself has legends of submerged kingdoms swallowed by angry seas. Could Yonaguni be one such kingdom, a relic of a world that drowned beneath the rising tide at the end of the Ice Age? Yet for every diver who swears it is a city, there is a geologist who swears it is a quirk of stone. For every carving seen in the shadows, another insists it is nothing but the ocean playing tricks on the eye. But what is most telling is the silence that follows these debates. No government launches extensive excavations. No universities fund long-term studies. The site remains largely unexamined, left to the divers and the currents. One cannot help but ask why. Perhaps it is easier to let Yonaguni remain ambiguous. To acknowledge it fully would ignite questions too volatile for the established narrative. Questions of migration, of knowledge, of civilizations erased. Was Yonaguni part of a greater network of ancient cultures, linked not by trade, but by something deeper? A shared heritage now buried beneath the sea? As you swim among its terraces, you cannot help but feel the weight of absence. The silence is not empty, but charged, as though the stones remember ceremonies, footsteps, voices long extinguished. Your bubbles rise toward the light above, but the monument itself seems to sink deeper into enigma. Could it have been a temple where priests watched the stars? A palace where kings ruled lands now drowned? Or was it a lighthouse of stone, guiding ships through waters that have long since vanished? Yonaguni is not alone. All along the coasts of Japan, divers report ruins beneath the water. Walls, roads, gates. Off Okinawa, near Karama, structures resembling fortresses lie hidden. Collectively, they suggest not a single monument, but an entire drowned landscape, a cityscape swallowed by the sea. The ocean floor is littered with fragments, stones squared too neatly, roads stretching too evenly, artifacts lying too silently to be dismissed as mere rocks. Yet what chills researchers most is not the stones, but the dates. Geologists who reluctantly study the area admit that if the structures were carved by humans, they must have predated 10,000 years ago. That would place them in an era no textbooks dare to imagine, a time when primitive humans may have been building cities that rival anything we know today. If that is true, then history is not just wrong. It is incomplete. It is missing an entire civilization erased not by myth but by water. And perhaps that is why the silence persists. To recognize Yonaguni is to admit that our story as a species is far older, far stranger than we have been taught. But here is where the current grows darker. Legends in Japan speak of Mu, a lost continent said to have stretched across the Pacific before vanishing beneath the sea. Scholars scoff, dismissing it as folklore. Yet the parallels between Mu and Yonaguni cannot be ignored. A drowned land, an ancient culture, a silence where answers should be. Could Yonaguni be a surviving fragment of this forgotten world? The waters above Yonaguni shimmer with deceptive calm, but below them lies a question that refuses to die. Who carved the pyramid of the deep? Was it nature, shaping stone with an artist's precision? Or was it a civilization whose name we no longer remember? A civilization whose ruins sleep while we tell ourselves they never existed? And if such a city lies beneath Japan, visible to divers even today, what then hides in deeper waters, beyond the reach of human eyes, where trenches descend into eternal night? The ocean, it seems, gives us glimpses, but never the whole. It reveals just enough to unsettle, just enough to suggest, before pulling the curtain closed. For while Yonaguni raises questions, the next revelation does more. It threatens to unite the myths of East and West into a single submerged truth. The story does not end in Japan. It continues across oceans, where waters hide ruins so vast, so undeniable, that even skeptics hesitate before dismissing them, and it is to those ruins that we must now turn. The Atlantic is a restless ocean, forever in motion, forever concealing what lies beneath. Sailors have long told tales of lights in the depths, of shapes glimpsed through waves, of ruins glimpsed where no ruins should be. If the Indian Ocean hints at forgotten antiquity and the Pacific suggests drowned empires, the Atlantic whispers of something far more haunting, a vast network of sunken cities, their stones lying in silence while the tide washes away memory itself. One such site emerges near the coast of Cuba. In the year 2001, oceanographers conducting sonar mapping stumbled upon something that stopped them cold: symmetrical formations lying 2,000 feet beneath the surface. What the scans revealed were not scattered rocks, but vast geometric patterns, rectangles, circles, even pyramidal shapes, stretching across several square kilometers of the seabed. To those who first studied the images, the conclusion seemed unavoidable. This was the outline of a city. Subsequent dives confirmed the impossible. Structures rose from the sand, stone blocks larger than those at Stonehenge, aligned with uncanny precision. Walls stretched for hundreds of feet. Some divers claimed to have seen roads, others staircases leading nowhere. At such depths, the site would have been dry land at least 10,000 years ago, perhaps much earlier, suggesting that an advanced culture thrived there before the seas claimed it. And then, just as quickly as it was discovered, the Cuban city fell into shadow. News reports that once spoke of Atlantis found evaporated. The institutions involved grew quiet. The footage, the images, the data, all faded from public view. What little remains is scattered. A handful of interviews, a few sonar maps, whispers from divers who described a sense of walking through the streets of ghosts. But here lies the controlled revelation. If the Cuban site is real, it is not alone. Across the Atlantic, from the Bahamas to Portugal's Azores, divers and researchers have reported similar submerged structures. Off Bimini, in the Bahamas, lies the famous Bimini Road, a stretch of megalithic blocks arranged like a causeway. Mainstream science calls it natural beach rock fractured by the sea. Yet divers describe blocks aligned too neatly, some stacked like walls, others stretching in curves as though marking harbours or streets. The Bimini Road sparked theories for decades, especially after the psychic Edgar Cayce predicted that Atlantis would be found there. But beyond prophecy lies something more tangible. The road appears to lead into deeper waters, where sonar has hinted at further structures buried beneath sand. If these formations are artificial, they too would predate known civilization by millennia. The Atlantic, then, becomes not merely an ocean, but a graveyard of cities, and every myth of Atlantis suddenly takes on sharper edges. Plato spoke of a great island nation swallowed by the sea in a single night, its temples and palaces disappearing beneath waves. Scholars dismiss it as allegory, a tale of hubris and morality. Yet how curious it is that across the Atlantic, we find structures that seem to mirror Plato's description. Geometric layouts, massive blocks, pyramids, and temples, vanished beneath the ocean thousands of years ago. Still, one must be careful. Mystery demands doubt as much as it demands wonder. Could the Cuban site be nothing more than volcanic formations, their symmetry an illusion of sonar imaging? Could the Bimini Road be fractured limestone, coincidentally aligned? Perhaps. And yet, if these were the simple truths, why the silence? Why do reports vanish, funding disappear, and investigations halt just as discoveries grow too compelling? Some whisper of suppression, that acknowledging such ruins would unravel not only history, but geopolitics. Imagine if an advanced culture thrived in the Americas 10,000 years ago. It would rewrite the story of migration, of the peopling of continents, of the rise and fall of civilizations. It would force us to ask if Atlantis was not merely a myth, but a memory, a collective trauma encoded in stories that survived while cities drowned. Multiple theories swirl in these waters. One suggests a lost continent, Atlantis, Mu, or some unnamed land, sank beneath catastrophic floods at the end of the Ice Age, its people scattered to seed younger civilizations. Another claims these ruins belong to cultures entirely unknown, erased before writing could preserve them. A third, more radical, wonders if the builders were not Homo sapiens at all, but a parallel branch of humanity lost to extinction and water. Yet another theory speaks of cataclysmic events, asteroids striking the oceans, triggering tsunamis that swallowed coastal cities worldwide. Geological evidence hints at violent floods around 12,000 years ago, a period known as the Younger Dryas. Could it be that the cities we now glimpse beneath the seas are casualties of that global disaster? And if so, might ancient myths of floods and drowned kingdoms be less metaphor and more memory? Walk the Bimini Road in your imagination. Feel the stones beneath your feet, smoothed by water, but too deliberate to dismiss. See the horizon swallowed by waves, the road vanishing into deeper blue where light cannot follow. What lies at the end? A harbour, a temple, or nothing at all? Nothing but sand and silence, mocking our desire to find patterns in stone. The deeper you go, the more questions arise. Divers in Cuba report not only walls and roads, but monoliths etched with strange markings, too eroded to decipher, yet suggestive of symbols. Some claim to see pyramids larger than those at Giza, their tips barely emerging from the sand. These accounts are dismissed as exaggerations. But why then do they persist, repeated by different voices across different years? Here lies the tension. Every discovery offers just enough evidence to suggest truth, but never enough to confirm it. The ocean reveals and conceals in equal measure, leaving us with fragments that hint at a world erased. If the Atlantic does hide such cities, they may not be unique. Geological records suggest sea levels rose over 400 feet after the last ice age. Imagine coastlines swallowed, deltas drowned, islands lost. Every city built near the shore, a natural cradle of civilization, would have been claimed. That means thousands of potential sites now lie beneath waves, their stones hidden, their histories denied. The Cuban city, the Bimini Road, the whispers of Atlantis. Together they form a mosaic, incomplete yet undeniable. And though science dismisses them, the human imagination refuses to let go. Perhaps it is not imagination at all, but instinct, an echo in our collective memory, reminding us of cities once real, once thriving, now gone. But we are left with haunting questions. Who built them? What knowledge did they hold? Why do we resist their reality? And most troubling of all, if entire civilizations could vanish once, could it happen again? The Atlantic swells with secrets, its depths stretching far beyond our reach. What we see are only glimpses, shadows on sonar, whispers from divers. Yet each glimpse feels like a warning, each whisper like a memory rising from the deep. And the trail does not end here. Beyond the Atlantic, in the heart of the Mediterranean, lies yet another secret. A city so well preserved beneath the waves that to look upon it is to see a ghost, frozen in time. Unlike Cambay, unlike Yonaguni, unlike Bimini, this city is no mere whisper. It is a testimony carved in stone waiting for us to confront it. But to reach it, we must leave behind myths of Atlantis and embrace something even stranger. The ruins that science cannot deny, yet still refuses to speak of. If the Indian Ocean whispered of Cambay, if the Pacific suggested Yonaguni, and if the Atlantic teased us with Cuba and Bimini, then the Mediterranean does something different. It reveals. Here, beneath relatively shallow waters, lie ruins so undeniable that even skeptics cannot erase them. Cities drowned not by time alone, but by disasters written into both stone and story. One such place is Heracleion, also known as Thonis. For centuries it existed only in ancient Greek writings, a legendary city at the mouth of the Nile, a hub of trade and ritual where pharaohs met with gods. Historians dismissed it as myth, a poetic exaggeration of Alexandria's grandeur, but in the year 2000, French archaeologist Franck Gaudiot uncovered the impossible. Heracleion was real. 20 miles northeast of Alexandria, divers descended into waters clouded with silt. What they found was staggering. Statues taller than men, temples collapsed yet intact, inscriptions naming Heracleion in exact detail. Streets, canals, docks, all perfectly preserved beneath the sea. The city had not merely sunk, it had been swallowed whole by catastrophe. Perhaps an earthquake or liquefaction of the delta soil, sending it sliding into the waves around the 8th century AD. Heracleion proves that great cities do vanish into the sea, leaving behind not myths, but evidence. Unlike Cambay or Yonaguni, there is no doubt, no dismissal. The ruins are real, the artifacts catalogued, the temples raised again in museum halls. Yet even with this undeniable proof, silence persists. If Heracleion, once considered a myth, was real, how many other myths of drowned cities might also hold truth? And Heracleion is not alone. Nearby lies Canopus, another Egyptian city submerged. Across the Mediterranean, in Greece's Pavlopetri, a city older than both Homer and the Parthenon rests beneath shallow waves. Dating back nearly 5,000 years, Pavlopetri still shows its grid of streets, its courtyards, its stone foundations. It is, by all definitions, an ancient planned city, yet it lies forgotten under just a few meters of water. Divers walking Pavlopetri's streets describe a surreal sensation. Columns rising from sand, walls outlining vanished homes, the feeling of strolling through a neighborhood where life once thrived, now silenced by sea. It is not imagination. It is not myth. It is proof that human civilizations have again and again lost their homes to rising tides. And then, farther west, off the coast of Spain, lies another site, Portus Magnus. Roman ruins stretch beneath the water, once bustling harbours now reduced to shadows. Catastrophes, earthquakes, tsunamis, each left scars. The Mediterranean, cradle of so many civilizations, has also been their grave. So why does the narrative stop here? Why do we accept the more recent drowned cities but resist the older ones? Why do we catalogue Heracleion yet dismiss Cambay, map Pavlopetri yet deny Yonaguni? The pattern is clear. The closer the city fits into accepted history, the more willing we are to acknowledge it. The farther back it stretches, the more silence grows. But myths persist. Plato's Atlantis, yes, but also tales from Sardinia of islands swallowed. Legends from Malta of temples built by giants, now partly underwater. Stories from Crete of coastal palaces lost to waves, each aligns with ruins glimpsed beneath the sea. Malta itself holds structures, megalithic temples, partly submerged, older than Egypt's pyramids, carved from stone, aligned to solstices, their builders unknown. Some lie at the water's edge, others beneath shallow seas, suggesting coastlines once different, seas once lower, and temples swallowed by the gradual rise. If Malta's temples predate the pyramids, who then were their builders? And why do we find echoes of them across oceans? Theories rise like tides, each more unsettling than the last. Some claim the Mediterranean submerged cities are isolated incidents, local disasters, earthquakes, floods. Others suggest they are fragments of a global cataclysm at the end of the Ice Age, when glaciers melted and seas rose violently. Still others whisper of civilizations far older than we admit, civilizations erased not once but many times, their ruins scattered across coasts, now drowned. And then comes the forbidden theory that what we call myths of gods descending, of floods punishing humanity, of lands swallowed in nights of terror, are memories. That our ancestors did not invent these tales but preserved them, warning us in the only language they had, story. But if that is true, if the drowned cities of the Mediterranean are the echoes of those stories, then we must ask how many more lie waiting. The ocean covers 70% of our planet. We have mapped the stars more than the seabed. What else lies hidden, beyond sonar, beyond reach? One cannot help but wonder, if Heracleion could be lost so recently, how many Cambays lie undiscovered? If Pavlopetri could vanish for millennia beneath shallow waters, how many Yonagunis remain buried in trenches deeper than Everest is tall? And if Atlantis was once myth, yet mirrors Cuba's ruins too closely to dismiss, then perhaps the greatest secret of all is not that these cities exist, but that we are not meant to find them. Imagine a world before our world, a civilization global in scale, thriving when seas were lower, when coastlines stretched farther. Imagine its cities, Cambay, Yonaguni, Cuba, Bimini, Heracleion, Pavlopetri, connected not by accident but by memory. And then imagine it gone, swallowed in centuries of floods, earthquakes, and rising tides, leaving behind only whispers that became myths. Why does science refuse to speak of this? Perhaps because certainty is safer than mystery. Perhaps because rewriting the past means rewriting our identity. Or perhaps because the ocean keeps its secrets well, and those who glimpse them are too few to shift the tide. The Mediterranean ends our journey not with answers, but with a mirror. It shows us that cities do drown, that myths can be real, that silence does not mean absence. But it also leaves us with unease, because if this happened before, could it happen again? Seas continue to rise, coastlines shrink. Are we too building our cities at the edge of oblivion? Picture this, centuries from now, divers swimming above what was once New York, London, or Shanghai, currents brushing against skyscraper ruins, fish darting through windows, archaeologists puzzling over artifacts as we puzzle over Cambay's pottery. What we call impossible today may become inevitable tomorrow. The ocean holds memory longer than we do. Its waves roll over truth and myth alike, erasing distinctions until only silence remains. But listen closely, and that silence speaks. It tells us that we are not the first to build, not the first to dream, not the first to vanish. And so, as we leave the drowned streets of Heracleion and Pavlopetri behind, as we drift upward toward the sunlight, we must ask one final question. What other cities, what other truths lie waiting in the abyss, too deep for us to see, yet too real to be denied? The ocean knows. The ocean remembers. The ocean is not finished with us.